Welcome to the Manders Mindset Podcast. Here you'll find both monologue and interviews of entrepreneurs, coaches, healers, and a variety of other people, where your host Amanda Russo will discuss her own mindset and perspective and her guest mindset and perspective on the world around us. Manders and her guests will help explain to you how shifting your mindset will shift your life.
Welcome to Manders Mindset, where we explore the power of shifting your mindset to shift your life. I'm your host, Amanda Russo, and I am here today with Jenny Jansen, and she is a licensed independent social worker of a clinical practice and a certified adult chair master coach. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Amanda.
So, who would you say Jenny is at the core?
I often say that Jenny at the core is just love and light. And I know it sounds kind of cheesy and woo-woo, but I really believe that my divine purpose here on the planet is just to help people to see who they are before the world told them who to be. And I think at our core, we're all here to share love, to share our authenticity, and to be the best and highest versions of ourselves. And so I like to just embody that for myself, because I feel like when we are able to kind of be who we're here to be on the planet, that we give everyone else permission to do the same. And it just kind of raises that vibration of joy and love and acceptance. And that's just kind of what I strive for.
I love that. That's awesome. Can you take us down memory lane a little bit? Tell us about your foundation, family dynamic, childhood, however deep you want to go with that.
I've never deep moment to go. Okay, so I am the middle child, only girl. I have an older brother and a younger brother. And I was always told that I was the light of the house. I was the energy of the house. You know, both of my brothers were very, we were all, I'd like to say I'm relatively intelligent, but my brothers were very book smart. And I was more of the personality, the loud one. And so with that, I think people were drawn to that energy, but also I think at times it also made me feel a little bit like an outcast. I was like, I felt very different than my brothers growing up. I was the one who was loud and dancing around and all this stuff. And they kind of were into their books and their numbers and all this stuff. We got along pretty well growing up and everything, and even still today. But there was definitely a shift where I realized that I was different. And I didn't necessarily think that it was a negative thing all the time, but it made it difficult for me to really understand my emotional side, because my brothers were very logical. And so me being more of an emotional child, I felt kind of like a little bit just different, and learning how to navigate that in a different way. Being the only girl and being kind of more on the emotional side, I was the one that started therapy first. I was the one that kind of got into more of my own healing journey, I would say, more so than the rest of my family did. And so I kind of see that as a superpower in a sense, because I feel like I knew myself well enough to know that that's what I needed, even though it wasn't really, common talk necessarily, until it came to the point where I needed to be common talk. And so I kind of see that as a strength of mine, that, I feel like I'm very intuitive and knew what I needed, but also didn't always have the language to say what I needed, because it wasn't kind of a typical topic of conversation, I guess. And so, I moved when I was 11 from New York to South Carolina. So that was kind of a culture shock. And, so just learning how to navigate who I am and, the things that I liked and didn't like. And, it's just kind of typical teenage stuff, I would say. But yeah, so I think growing up, I would say I call myself the neon purple sheep of my family, and I mean that with the most loving, I love my family. We jive, we get along, but I think that kind of pins the point where I felt very different, whether it wasn't really anything that they did. It was just kind of how I felt. And because I was always very loud and bright and didn't always feel like I fit in, but I navigated and made it through, and here I am today.
Okay, and now at 11, you moved from New York to South Carolina. Now I'm from Massachusetts, so I've spent plenty of time in New York. That is definitely a culture shock. How was that for you?
It was challenging. I spent summers and Christmases down south because my mom's family is down here, and you know, it was challenging though making that shift from just spending vacations in South Carolina with my cousins to actually school, and leaving my dad's side of the family is we're all really close up there too. And so I think the culture shock of it, the South is a lot slower. There's, people want to know you a little bit more than they do in the North. Nothing against the North. I still love, everybody up there, but it is just culturally very different. And so I kind of had to get used to people wanting to engage in my life. I still remember the first day of 6th grade, and we moved in October, and this kid, it came up to me and like, oh, let me see your schedule. And he kind of like went to grab it from my hand, and I ripped it back from him. I was like, excuse you. And I was like, because he was imposing on my space. And I was like, I was not used to people being so, engaged and energetic, like just like, oh, I want to get to know you. It's like everyone kind of like just did their own thing. And, it was just very different. And then I remember one of my friends in 6th grade, she didn't tell me this until high school. She's like, I was afraid not to be friends with you because you were kind of a bitch. And I was like, oh, like I had no idea that that's like the persona that I was giving out. So again, kind of going back to that, like, who am I and how do I present versus how do I feel? Because on the inside, I was a very emotional child. And I think I masked that with that, I don't need anybody, that hyper independent, but I still deep down really wanted that, nurture, like that connection. And so it was a really challenging time. And even more, as I got older and learned more about, interestingly, astrology, I'm an Aries is my sun sign, which is very fiery, outward, bull in a china shop kind of thing. But my moon sign is Cancer, which is very like the crab. It's very, nurturing and loving. And so what I'm learning more about astrology actually speaks more to the personality that I feel like I'm stepping into more than the persona that I feel like I was putting out there as like that fiery perspective, if that makes sense. So like the more I learn about different aspects of my personality, I'm learning how to integrate those even to this day, and looking back and saying, oh, that's why I was the way I was, or that's how I, different aspects of my personality kind of came out. So it's been kind of this unfolding journey of, yeah, I can look back at myself at 11 or even younger when I lived in New York versus when I moved. And I feel like I feel like I've lived like 16,000 lifetimes and I'm not even 40. So it's, I feel like I'm always evolving and changing just with the changing of the wind. So, a lot of things that I feel like my soul's here to experience. And I often say I'm giving my soul the ride of its life.
I feel the same way. People tell me all the time how young I am, but I'm like, I feel like I lived like thousands of lives by now. And it's interesting. You mentioned you noticed the culture shock even so young. I lived in Massachusetts my whole life and lived in Rhode Island for part of my life. And then I spent a few months where I lived in Florida, and it wasn't long. And everybody's like, oh, you won't experience the culture. I did. I did experience the culture shock, because even at one point I was waiting for like transportation, and then some guy started talking to me, and I remember asking my boyfriend, I'm like, why is this guy talking to me? And he's like, people just talk to each other. And I was so blown away. So when you mentioning the schedule, I was like, I relate to that. I relate to that. Something so subtle, but you're like,
And it blows your mind. I remember being in New York with my dad, actually, this is long after we moved. I was at high school probably. And my dad would travel back and forth for work all the time. And he's like, I want to show you something. And we're driving down the road, and he started waving at people, because that's what we do in the South. It's like, you're in the neighborhood and you're driving, and you're just kind of like waving, hey, neighbor kind of thing. And we counted the number of people that literally would like turn their heads to like, who is that guy? Why is he waving at me? And it's just like, even just that subtle thing was so, I was just like, oh my gosh, I forgot people don't, in the way of like growing up, especially like your preteen, teenager, like your brain is still developing. And so you're still learning about the world and about yourself and where you fit. And to learn that there are so many different dynamics and the ways that we change our personality to fit the environment that we're in, I think is really, I don't know, to me, like looking back at different areas, like, oh, wow, that's when that aspect of my personality came out. And then when I was in this stage of my life, this aspect of my personality came out. And I've often like, even when I'm working with clients, as a therapist and life coach, it's like, I often think about the metaphor of like life's the stage, and so there are going to be certain acts and scenes where it's like, okay, now my Aries, fiery personality is like, that's the lead cast member of this scene and this act and this, on the stage. And then it's like, okay, now in this next phase, okay, this character is off. Okay, now comes out the nurturing side. And then this character, so it's almost like this revolving door of all of these different parts of us that each have different opportunities and different experiences in life to be able to shine. It doesn't mean that we're necessarily masking up or changing our personalities so much as it is we're so multifaceted that there's going to be a different side of me that comes out when I'm, than when I am to dinner with friends or when I'm like, so it's, I don't know. It's this one of those things, existential aspects of life that I contemplate a lot. It's like, the different parts of our personality versus masking up and being somebody. And I think it's more of an internal focus versus an external focus. Am I changing my personality to fit the environment? Or am I just allowing a different part of my personality to come out that still feels organic to me, but does that make sense?
It does completely. And, it kind of ties back into what you mentioned before. And I really want to highlight that because I love that. But about how do I present myself versus how do other people see me? Like whereas you think you're presenting yourself one way and you mentioned your friend was like, I had to be your friend because I thought you were too much of a bitch to not be your friend, which you didn't realize you had that persona, which is so interesting, And I like how you mentioned the stage. I think that's a great way, like whether you stay a stage, a show, a season, like, like there's different aspects of it. And, I love how you mentioned multiple characters. Even if it's not different environments, that's a great point about holding a baby versus out with your friends. Regardless of who you are, you're going to show up differently, with those two things. I could visualize that perfectly. Like, I don't have kids myself, but I'm an aunt, and one of my cousins just recently had a baby. So, like, I can really see that when, no matter who you are, your age, your gender, anything about yourself, that's a perfect example that you're going to show up differently.
It's all about like the soul connection to me. It's like, who am I? Like the first question you asked me, who am I at my heart and soul, like deep down at my core. And I see that as like, the soul that I was created to be, I truly believe is here to spread love and authenticity and help people to be the best versions of themselves. And showing up authentically, like I said, myself, I feel like gives others permission to do the same. And not just me, anybody. Like whenever we're our authentic selves, I think it gives other people permission to show up as their authentic selves. And back to the example of the stage, and part of my life coaching certification is through a model called the adult chair, which all talks about the stages of life as the child chair, which is 0 to 6. And then the adolescent chair is age 7 to 24. And the adult chair is 25 and up, theoretically speaking. So the child developmentally, because we start absorbing things in utero. So that's why it's 0 to 6. And that's when we're most impressionable. That's where our core needs, our core emotions develop. And we are playful, we're exploratory, we're curious, but we're also the most susceptible because we don't have discernment to know what is true and what is untrue. We're kind of just sponges. We take it all in, whether it's fact or not. And so that's where a lot of times our beliefs about the world and about ourselves come from our primary caregivers, our teachers, we start to kind of create a blueprint or a basis for who we are in the world. Like you were talking about gender, everything from, oh, you're a good girl, you're a dancer, you're this. It's like, okay, well, this is who I am. And so this is the persona I have to hold up. But around the age of 7, our ego comes online, just the ways that our brain develops. And we start to realize, like, hold on a second, I'm separate. I'm different from this person. If you think about preschool age kids and kindergarten age kids, like, they're just friends with everybody. But then when you get into first, second, third grade, they're like, oh, boys are gross or girls are gross. And then it's like you start to realize that separation and the comparison of, oh, that I'm smarter than this person, or I'm more athletic than this person, or less athletic. And we start to play the comparison game. And when I often explain this 7 to 24, which is pre-adolescence, adolescence, and post-adolescence, I often think about the question is, who did I have to become in order to belong? And who did I have to become in order to receive love? And so sometimes we become codependent. Sometimes we become people pleasers, the class clown. This is where we become addicted, to be honest, because this is when our core needs and our core emotions become too much. Because if I'm crying and I'm told, oh, your feelings are too much, or, don't be a crybaby, I risk attachment. I risk that belonging that we're seeking. And so what do? Is I learn to shut my emotions down because it's not acceptable to people around me. And so addiction is one way to do that, but obviously mostly in the later adolescent years, hopefully, sometimes mid. But this could be addiction to being busy. It could be addiction to work. It can be addiction to achievement. It doesn't have to be addiction to substances. And so this is where we live in the past and the future. We live in story and assumption because we're trying to navigate the world to see, where do I fit and where do I belong, so that I can receive that love and safety that that child is looking for, right? All the child wants is to be loved and to know that they belong. And so we spend our adolescent years trying to figure that out. Now, the thing is, at 25, biologically, we become adults. Between 25 and 30, our prefrontal cortex is online, and that's where our executive functioning is. And, if we had the right tools that we were taught growing up, we can slide into that adult chair where we are present, where we can set boundaries, we can feel our emotions. We live in fact and truth over story and assumption. We can stay grounded when we're triggered. We're not as impulsive or reactive as we are in that adolescent phase. We're able to pause and slow down and make effective decisions. The problem is that how many of us are taught those tools? I swear we need this kind of stuff in schools instead of, learning function tables and, the layers of the ocean floor. And it's these tools that we need to learn in order to be functional adults, many of us are not taught. So I have clients that are in their 40s, 50s, 60s that are like, I'm still living in my adolescent chair. I don't have a healthy, so that's part of the work that I do, is to help them access that healthy adult and realize where they're stuck in either those inner child or inner adolescent, tendencies, so that they can live a more grounded and healthy life. So talking about the masks and the characters on stage that kind of rotate around, sometimes those characters on stage are not healthy, or they were healthy at one point. They were adaptive because they got us what we needed at the time. But here we are 10, 20 years later, and we're still using the same quote unquote tools that we did when we were 12 or that we did when we were 20. And it's like, okay, wait, maybe that doesn't work anymore. So we have to learn those new tools and introduce new characters onto the stage that we can then integrate and embody so that we can be in charge of our lives instead of letting those inner adolescent and inner child parts run the show.
That makes so much sense. I want to backtrack just a tad. So back when you went down south when you were 11, now high school and then college, did you do high school down south?
Oh, yeah, I've been in South Carolina.
And did you go to college down there?
How? University. Yeah. And I became a teacher. So I got my undergrad in elementary education, and I was a teacher for 4 years. I taught 5th grade. And then I lovingly now, I call it my quarter life crisis. Around 26, I quit my job and floundered around for a couple of years, had my own little, breakdown, breakthrough, whatever you want to call it. And then, so long story short, very short, is like I kind of crumbled in those 2 years. And then at 28, I went back to grad school at USC and got my master's in social work and became a therapist. And then I guess it was about 5 years later, 4 or 5 years later, I discovered the adult chair. I got certified as a life coach. And so now I kind of have a dual practice where I do some therapy and some coaching, depending on what each individual is looking for.
So what made you decide therapy and social work was what you wanted to make the shift to?
So I say function tables and the layers of the ocean floor earlier because those were two of my least favorite things to teach when I was a fifth grade teacher. Because to me, I had 10 and 11-year-olds who were going through a lot of really hard things. I taught in the Title I school, which is a lot of higher poverty, lower income, and a lot more challenges, both socioeconomically and, so a lot of times what I realized is when I felt the most inspired at work when I was a teacher was when my kids would come to me and say, Miss Jansen, can I sit with you at lunch? Or can we walk to the store? My brother just went to jail. Or, I'm struggling with this friend. Maybe we can work up with me, with the 10-year-olds. But it's like, that was when I felt so inspired and alive, is when I was having those meaningful connections with my students. And so I would get so burnt out and resentful over having to, I hate to say waste my time, like spend my time planning for the layers of the ocean floor and function tables and things that they really did not need. They needed emotional skills. They needed mindset shifts. They needed these tools that we would have to limit to a 15-minute walk at recess or a 15-minute lunch when I'm not navigating everybody else's behavior problems. I think that I realized that I always wanted to help people, and I always felt like I was really good at being relational and connecting. And I didn't feel like I was able to do that in the way that really honored the gifts that I have. And so that's what made me think about going into social work. I thought about counseling, but social work is kind of a wider umbrella. So I could be, that's why I have clinical practice, but there's also an advanced track where you can do or advanced practice where you could do organizations and community stuff. So it's the same amount of time, but I would have more of a wide net to cast if I ever decided that I wanted to go into a different field. I decided on social work because I wanted to connect. I like the one-on-one connection. I like to really get to know people and form relationship around things that mean something to them. I would say about 99% of my kids probably don't remember the layers of the ocean floor. But the ones that I can sit with and talk to them about their parents getting divorced, I have had students that have reached out to me even since then on social media, they're like, Miss Jansen, I still remember when we had this conversation, or I still remember when you did the, that's what made me switch to social work, or that's what made me switch to being a therapist, is because that meaningful connection is one of my top values. And I wanted to be able to form meaningful relationships with people that can really change, not just, that one fifth grade year of their life. I want it to impact other areas of their life. The people, I don't work with, I have a handful of adolescents, but most of the people I work with are adults that are looking to kind of go back and see holy crap, I'm still living in my adolescent chair, my inner child. And it's learning how to bridge the gap and how to have those meaningful connections and meet them with compassion and authenticity. And just it's not your fault that you're here. It's not your fault that this happened. And get so what are we going to do? Take ownership and agency over your life and heal those parts. Show up for those younger parts of you that didn't get the love and nurturing that they needed. I think about my students all the time when it comes to even seeing some of them on social media. Some of them have kids. And, so it's thinking about the impact, the generational impact that some of these meaningful connections can actually have. They're not going to be teaching there's the ocean floor. They're going to be teaching their kids those emotional and social and mental mindset shifts that really make an impact on the broader trajectory of life, I guess, and nothing against my role as a teacher. I honor and I love teachers. I respect the hell. I would not be who I am today if I didn't, go through my stint of being a teacher. And I still feel like I'm a teacher. I'm just a teacher in a different capacity. And I honor every stage of it, and it all has meaning. Even the quarter life crisis had a lot of meaning. I learned a lot in the depths of hell. I'll tell you that.
That's a very good point, though. I've never been a teacher myself, but I had a few years where I worked in a group home. So I saw like a lot of the lack of life skills, per se, that we're teaching our adolescents, And it's like, there's just, whether it's algebra, math, ocean floor, like there's more that I feel like we could really definitely be helping our kids with, So I understand why like that was a frustration for you. But I love how you still made that work, even though while unfortunately it wasn't what you wanted to do at the time, you still found ways to almost counsel the kids, like even before you fully made that shift. And I'm sure that helped a lot of them.
I mean, I like to think so, but even if it wasn't, I'm not saying that I was magic wand on all of my kids and everyone has a great life. Even if I could just make a difference in that 1 year, I didn't know what they were going home to. I didn't know what they were experiencing on the playground, there. But I think that even if they knew that I was a safe place to land, and that's all I could do. And that's what I had to do for those 4 years. Because I wanted to take them all home. I was like, I wish I could just take you all home with me. But I think that and I still employ this with my, with my counseling and life coaching, is like, if I can just be, even if it is for this, whatever time that I'm with a person, they are my 100% focus. And they know that I'm a safe place to land and that I'm there. I can't necessarily control what happens outside of my time with them. But if I can offer the best of what I've got in every single interaction that I have, and not just with clients, but with everybody, with friends, with family, with people at the grocery store, how can we be the best and brightest versions of ourselves? Because there's so much crap in the world. There's so much hardship. There's just so many hard things that we just don't even know what people are facing. I think about that sometimes. My Nana passed away. She was 100 years old. She was my heart, but she was like my heart and soul. A couple days later, I had to go to Lowe's to get something for my yard or whatever. I was in such grief. I remember just walking around and I'm just like, people have no idea that I am crumbling on the inside right now. And it made me think about like how we walk around, even at just the people at the grocery store or people at the restaurant. And it's like, you have no idea what is going on in their internal world. And it's like the masks that we wear of like, yep, everything's good. I'm just here eating my food, or I'm just here getting my groceries. It's like, you don't know that like, they didn't just have to put their dog to sleep, or that they, and it just, when you can experience your own crap and you experience your own darkness, I think in a way it shines light on the common humanity and helps us to see the common humanity in other people. And knowing that like none of us get out of this life alive without going through hardship and pain. But if we can like tap into, I think the deeper we can feel our darkness, the more compassion we can show up for other people. My mentor, Michelle Chalfant, who did the adult chair certification that I did and the master coaching, she says you can only take your clients as deeply as you've got yourself. And I hadn't realized that until I really reflected on the depths of my own darkness and that quarter life crisis that I talked about. Because there's no way in hell I would be the counselor and coach that I am had I not gone through the things that I've been through, because I can empathize differently. It's like when you have that lived experience, I may not understand every issue that every client has that comes to me. Like I've never experienced divorce. I've never experienced the loss of a child. I mean, there's so many things that I've not experienced that my clients come to me with. But I can say that I know what it feels like to feel powerless, to feel despair, to feel deep grief, to feel sadness, to feel confusion, to feel lost. Like I've experienced all of that. And I know I'll continue to experience it. But at the same time, I think when we can tap into our own emotional experiences, it helps us to really see that I might not understand what it's like to go through a divorce, but I understand what it's like to be at a crossroads in your life and not know what direction to go. And so I can feel with them that deep pain because the pain is universal. The trigger, what it causes the pain is one thing. But if you can connect with people on the lived experience of that pain and of that hardship, it helps us to really relate to each other and show compassion rather than judgment. I hate when I'm like, I just need somebody to listen. Or clients come to me and sometimes they're like, I just need somebody to listen. I don't need anybody to fix it. And it's like just being that witness and that listening ear, because there's so much power in just allowing yourself to speak your truth and not have it judged and not have it minimized and not have it critiqued and not have it, discombobulated and to say like, oh, you shouldn't feel this way. Freaking hate when people say that. When I hear people say, oh, you shouldn't feel that way, my favorite comeback is, well, whether I should or I shouldn't, I do. Period. End of story. Because there's no right or wrong way to feel. Like our feelings are our feelings and they all have meaning. They all have purpose. It's just about understanding, what is this emotion here to show me? Maybe my anger is here to show me that I need a boundary or that my boundaries are crossed. My sadness is showing me where I feel lost or where I feel longing or where I feel, something's missing in my life. Fear might be showing me that I'm in danger, and it's actually a very helpful emotion because it's going to help me to, get to safety. And so I think that there's a balance between understanding where our emotions come from and learning to relate with them differently. And we just don't do that very well as a society. It's all about productivity and achievement and, status and who do I have to be in order, again, that adolescent mindset, who do I have to be in order to belong and to be seen and loved? And most of the time people don't want to quote unquote see and love someone that's crumbling or because it's too painful because they haven't experienced their own pain and they're not comfortable with their own pain. And so I think that if we can, teach going back to the child and the adolescent and the teacher, it's like if we could teach these skills earlier, I think that, societally speaking, we can kind of adapt more into this holistic, understanding mindset of what it needs to be fully human and not just robots that I feel like a lot of us kind of fall into.
Yeah. No, it's so true. I think it needs to be taught earlier on, like you mentioned. And, the adolescent. And now you said to be seen and to be loved. That's what it is in the adolescent phase, the adolescent show.
In the adolescent phase, it's really how do I maintain love, belonging, and safety? Who do I have to be in order to be safe? Who do I have to be in order to belong? And who do I need to be in order to be loved? Being safe. If you grew up in an alcoholic household, you might need to focus more on what do I need to do in order to be safe? So you might become a little bit more recluse. You might become a little bit less expressive with your emotions and needs because it could set, the person off. Or it could, if there's violence in the home, the same kind of thing. It depends on the environment and the upbringing and the mentalities of things. Sometimes it is more about the achievement. Sometimes it is more about, perfection. Unfortunately, a lot of times, especially saw it so much in schools where we just want to lump kids into this, okay, you're in this grade, so this is what you need. It's like, I had students that barely spoke English in my class. And then I also had kids that were on a 12th grade reading level. And neither one is wrong. Neither one is wrong. And that was the hardest part, was trying, helping not to oh, you're in the blue group. That means that you're the low kid. It's like, no, screw that. No, you learn differently. You have different needs. You have a different brain. So it's like learning how to meet people where they are and adapt their mindset and adapt their skills to be, it's like going shopping for clothes. You buy the size that fits you, and it's like, who do we feel like we should be? And then how are we changing ourselves and manipulating ourselves to fit the mold of society rather than just living as our true authentic self and finding the environments that actually amplify and exemplify the unique gifts that we all have? Because that's how, in my opinion, that's how society flourishes, is having so much diversity. Because if we're all the same, then there's going to be unmet needs in other places. So I like my latest phrase. I go through like phases of phrases. And my latest one is I like to help people to live as the fullest expression of themselves, is like allowing all of my parts to have a chance on stage, and it's to honor the fact that, yes, I did go through a quarter life crisis. Yes, I did crumble and fall. And at times I wonder how I survived it. I'll just say that. Like, there are many times I'm like, I shouldn't be alive today, but for some reason I am. And so I honor that. And it's like, but I had to allow that crumble to happen so that I could find my resiliency and find my footing again as the truest version of myself. And then I keep building on that true version. The more I learn about myself, about where, what I like, what I don't like, I'm still peeling back layers of myself. And I feel like I will be until the day I die. And I think it's a beautiful example of like the journey of life. And I know that's like a cliche thing, but I don't always say like, oh, trust the journey, enjoy the journey. Well, the journey sucks sometimes and we're not always going to enjoy it. But if we can honor each step along the way and see how it can serve us. Like when I was in my quarter life crisis, I was like, this freaking sucks, man. Like, I don't want to live this way. And, when looking back on it, and that's why I call lovingly now, because I would not be who I am today had I not gone through that. And so it's allowing for all of the parts to exist and allowing for the peaks and the valleys to inform and shape who we're meant to be and everything that our soul is here to experience.
What would you say helped you get through that quarter life crisis the most?
A lot of therapy. I think too, yeah, because there was definitely a time where I was digging my heels in, for sure. I was kicking and screaming. I was flipping off and cussing out providers that I had. I'm like, you suck. I hate you. I don't want this. And so when I say a lot of therapy, I see a lot of people that didn't give up on me, family, friends, therapists, doctors that just really helped to shine the light on the parts of myself that I couldn't see yet, or that had gotten hidden, or that I had judged. And, so sometimes I think that is another reason that I really strive to go into therapy and coaching, is because I see the power, like it saved my life. And I can say that with 100% certainty that it saved my life. And I think that it was that. And it was also, because I've talked to like former therapists and I'm like, well, Jenny, you did the work. You did the work. We're here to hold your hand and guide you. But again, like I was saying before, it's like if I have an hour a week with somebody, I don't know what they're doing for the other hours of their week. And so that's where they have to do the work. And so I say that, yeah, therapy saved my life. I also have to remember that I had to do the other 100 hours a week of the work. A lot of deep soul searching and diving and saying like, this is not how I'm going to go out. This is not the life that I want to live. And sometimes this drudgery of walking through quicksand with weighted boots on until you can kind of find your way out of hell, and even finding a landing spot. Sometimes like you're not totally out of hell, but if you can like get up enough to see, okay, there's a little glimmer of light. Let me just hold on to that and find a landing to sit on for a little bit of rest until you get enough energy and momentum to then take the next step and then take the next step. And sometimes I think, we think progress is linear, but it's not. Progress is a lot of slipping and falling and a lot of crying, a lot of like random bursts of crying. And I don't think we talk about that enough, that crying is so healing and getting the emotion up and out of your body. I think doing, going back to like what got me out of my quarter life crisis, I really think sometimes it is just one step at a time, and not looking too far into the future and not dwelling too much on the past, but it's like, okay, I'm being where my feet are and just taking that next step and saying, okay, what is it that I need to do today? Kind of taking like the 12-step approach in a sense. I never, went to 12-step meetings or anything, but the one day at a time. And sometimes it is one breath at a time, one moment at a time, one decision at a time. And, I'm making this decision for my adult chair or my adolescent. When I learned about the adult chair model, it really gave me a touchstone to say, what chair am I in as I'm making this decision? What am I, and why am I choosing this decision? Am I choosing to do something that maybe not be in line with my adult chair? And why? Like, what need is unmet? What am I actually trying to achieve by being codependent or by avoiding or numbing out and not actually feeling my feelings? And it's about making those subtle shifts and subtle changes that, at least realign. We're not meant to be in our adult chair all the time. If I have a client that says, oh, I've been in my adult chair all week, I'm like, cool, because I was totally in my adolescent like 2 hours ago. Like we're naturally going to ebb and flow out of different phases and different stages because life happens and we get triggered and we have pasts and we have emotions. But I think if we can just take one step at a time and just, pause and slow down and consciously choose, like what mindset am I coming from? And am I kind of pointing myself in the direction of the life that I want, or am I farting away from it? And getting radically honest with yourself about the ways that I had to get radically honest with myself. And I still do, about the ways that I get in my own way. And so that I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with, like I said, myself included, is like, wow, how am I the one contributing to my own pain and suffering? And nobody's coming to save me. Nobody's coming to save you. And so it's like we have to be our own best, best friend, our best advocate, our best everything. Because we're who we wake up with every morning and go to bed with every night. So, becoming your own best friend, I think is the journey of a lifetime. And it's ebbs and flows, but I think holding that as like the North Star is saying like, I'm obviously not dying today, so how am I going to make the most of the life that I have? And so how am I going to choose to spend the life that I have? I'm not dying today.
I like that question. Now, you mentioned not always meant to be in our adult chair. So you think the chairs ebb and flows as well, even once we hit adult age?
Oh, yeah. I didn't even know I had an adult chair. I have clients that are in their 50s and 60s that are like, I'm still in my adolescent, because it's not necessarily an age thing. It's an energy. It's the energy of the codependent, the energy of the addict, the energy of the anxious, depressed, past, future focused, can't stay out of story and assumption. Any kind of argument. When we get triggered, we're in our adolescent chair because we're brought back to something of the past, or we're brought back to a feeling. Emotions are in the inner child. And so the idea is to, as an adult, we can witness our experience. Just like when I'm like, if we're going through something that is really challenging, I can either be in my grief or I can notice like, oh, I'm experiencing grief right now. And sometimes it does kind of merge together. But I think the idea is to meet the child from the adult without the adolescent interference, because the child is where our core needs and our core emotions are. And so the thing is that the adolescent comes online to almost block those needs and emotions because they're not acceptable. Remember that those are the things that get us kicked out of the tribe. Those are the things that are too much for people, and it's going to make us not be lovable or not belong or not be enough. And so the adolescent chair comes online and says, okay, who do I have to be? So we got to shut this child down. We got to shut him up. And so the idea is, it's almost like the adolescent is like the gatekeeper. And sometimes we have to meet with that adolescent and say, hey, look, I know you're doing your best and you're trying to help, but let me chat with the child for a minute and see what the actual need is. Like, I'm here and I'm safe and I'm not going anywhere. And that's the whole idea of becoming your own best friend, your own best parent, even like reparenting yourself and treating yourself with that love and compassion that so often we treat other people, but we never offer it to ourselves. And so the idea, yes, we're not going to be in our adult chair all the time. However, the idea is that when we experience those triggers and we experience those emotions of the inner child, that we're able to notice it within our bodies and then pause. And in that pause, that's where we could realign with that adult. And we could say, hold on a second, I'm noticing I have like a flutter in my heart, or I notice I have a pit in my stomach. Let me get curious about this. What is coming up for me? And then how do I work with this emotion or this trigger that's coming up from the lens of the adult? How do I get into fact and truth? How do I slow down and feel and process my emotions? And then how do I, from my adult, in fact and truth, communicate my needs to whoever is around? If somebody else triggered me, how do I respond rather than react? Those are some of the tools and strategies that within the adult chair model I often teach clients. And I think it's just emotional wellness, emotional and mental wellness that many of us miss growing up or even sometimes into adulthood. And I think it's something that we consistently navigate because we're always being met with varying personalities and varying, like my friends that are also adult chair coaches, we talk very differently than maybe people that don't have, the same language. We often say the adult chair is its own language. And it's not to say one's better than the other. It's just the gap of knowledge. Just like if I were to talk to somebody about engineering, I would not be able to relate to them because I know nothing about engineering. It doesn't mean that I'm wrong and they're right. It's just a different language. I think that it's a language that is relatable and universal and can be really helpful and healing to people's wellness and their relationships and living as the fullest expression of themselves.
That makes a lot of sense. And so I like how you gave the example of the adolescents being like a gatekeeper. I could almost visualize that. No, that makes a lot of sense because they are there to keep us safe and loved and almost liked, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I mean, think about it. Just to use one example. So addiction, for example. Many people who struggle with addiction, I will say close to 100% of the ones that I see have experienced trauma or have experienced really negative challenge. Trauma is a very wide term. It doesn't mean that they've experienced the big T versus the little T traumas. Little T traumas are a little bit more the chronic things bullying or even somebody making a negative comment toward us or a judgmental comment. That can be traumatizing. Trauma it's not what happens to you. It's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. So we can have these big T traumas, if you were, robbed at gunpoint or if you were assaulted or if you experienced war, the big ones that we often hear about. But many times we don't validate the little T traumas, an ugly comment or, the chronic things of not feeling seen or not feeling heard. And so many times when we, going back to the original question of the adolescent, it's when you think about somebody who's addicted to substances, oftentimes what they're trying not to feel is pain or sadness. What they're trying not to feel is loneliness. What they're trying not to feel is rejection. And so what can I do? Let me just hit the bottle. This makes me feel better. Let me go do a line of coke or let me go get high. That's going to help me to feel better for the moment. And so that's the gatekeeper. And that's what's trying to protect and actually help, quote unquote, the child from now having to feel that pain. So it's not a bad part. Whenever somebody comes to me and they've struggled with addiction, I'm like, cool, you found something that worked. Addiction works. That's why people do it, but it doesn't work in the long term. And it doesn't work if you're trying to have a meaningful, fulfilling life. You're also numbing out your feelings, but you're also really traumatizing your relationships. You're also there's a lot of health complications. So you also have to look at the cost benefit of what are you gaining versus what are you losing? And then how do we work with allowing yourself to feel those feelings that you're trying to numb out with those substances and learn that it's okay and learn that you can tolerate it and learn skills and other coping strategies, because that's the way I see drugs and alcohol or any other addiction. It's a coping strategy. It's just not a very helpful one when it comes to the holistic look at how you want to live your life.
Yeah.
the people who come to me for help with it, obviously they're looking for another solution. So, and that's just one example of how the adolescent is the gatekeeper. Codependency and anxiety, depression, like they all have their own reasons for existing. But it's just about getting to know each part and saying, hey, babe, like, what are you here for? What are you trying to tell me? What are you trying to teach me? And then let me inform you, hey, I'm actually 40, 50, 60 years old. Like, I run my own business. I have my own kids. I support, I am adaptive in all these other areas. Let me take care of you too. And so it's about showing up for ourselves and reparenting those parts so that we can feel safe first within ourselves and then bring that safety into our relationships and that wholehearted expression of who we are meant to be.
Yeah. I love how you mentioned earlier, even outside of addiction or people pleasing, the class clown. I think that's another way that's not always talked about as often. Like you hear people pleasing and addiction very often, but I think the funny person is often overlooked who is sometimes suppressing their emotions, and I think that's a key point.
Oh, 100%. Using humor as a defense. It's interesting. I was talking to a client the other day about the contrast of the way that we present on the outside versus how we feel on the inside. What's this laughing on the outside, crying on the inside? And so often we see that, especially when I have clients that laugh a lot. I notice it, and I out myself as a therapist and that laugh a lot. I don't laugh. Especially, unless it's funny, but but they're like joking about their trauma or something like that. I'm like, I have to really bring them back down to reality and say like, wow, that sounds really challenging. I'm like, no, but really, like, imagine somebody else coming to you and I have to slow myself down because they want to be like, that's another key term that people are trying to get out of their emotions is they speak very fast and they're very much in their heads and they don't want to drop into their body and actually feel what they're feeling. And so there's a lot of subtle nuance that I notice in people and talking to them that I often have to kind of, be the buzzkill, but really talk about addiction, no pun intended, but I've got to, kind of shut the humor and say no, this is actually really powerful what you just said. Or wow, my heart really hurt as you're sharing that story with me. I have to kind of use a little bit of self-disclosure about how I'm responding to them so that they can see, wow, maybe it was really hard. And maybe there is stuck emotion in my body that I need to really unpack because how is holding on to this impacting my relationships? How is it impacting the way that I parent, the way I work, how I show up in my everyday life? Because a lot of times when we have lodged emotions that, they end up coming out sideways. It's like a pressure cooker. It's like before you know it, the top pops off and you're just like, oh crap, where did that come from? Is it we haven't figured out where the emotion is. So let's go find it and let's go figure out what it's here for. So, and I know I say that just kind of like it's it's just a typical Tuesday. Let's go find your deepest grief and fears. But it doesn't have to be this long drawn out thing. It can be very exciting. It's oh my God, yes, let's go find it. Let's go figure out what is it that's keeping me in this loop? Let's figure out what's keeping me in the cycle and see if we can unpack it a little bit and at least understand it so that I can learn how to respond to it differently. The next time that I notice that pit in my stomach or that tightness in my chest, it's learning how to read the body for those cues of how then we unconsciously or consciously respond to our environment and our triggers.
What would you say is a good first step to start learning the body a little bit?
Ooh, my favorite is breathwork. And I know you're a breathwork facilitator, so I'm not just saying that, but I love breathwork, body scans. I use the analogy of an MRI machine. If I were to imagine my body in an MRI machine, I wonder what parts of my body would glow or which ones would shine. Is it my heart? Is it maybe I have my ankle or my hip. I'm really tight in my hips or I'm really tight in my back. And just get curious and noticing it, moving the body in certain ways can really help to loosen some of those muscles and give them room to breathe and room to speak. And I know that sounds really weird, but I will say, imagine that your heart could speak to you. Like, what would your heart say? And just like energetically, I mean, we're energetic beings in a body, and our bodies are designed to speak to us all the time. You know, they let us know when we're hungry, when we're thirsty, when we're tired, but we miss learning how to understand and navigate our emotional cues. I know that when my stomach growls, I need to go get a snack, but I don't know that when my heart hurts that maybe I need to sit and breathe and cry for a little bit, or I need to journal, or I need to call a friend. So it's like learning what to do with our cues the way we learn how to handle our physical health. It's learning the cues of our emotional health.
You're right. We pay attention to the hunger cues, but we don't necessarily pay attention to the emotional cues. That's so true.
The lump in the throat, that's another huge one. Or like, wow, my eyes feel like they're going to cry. And then what do? We suck it up and we move on. We don't allow that expression to happen.
Now, I'm just curious personally, but when did you discover breathwork?
It was actually only a couple of years ago. I feel like I'm kind of a lifelong student of life. I learn one thing and then it leads me to another thing. And then it leads me to another thing. Oh, meditation. What's this? Mindfulness. What's this? And then it's just kind of like this rabbit trail. I don't know where I found it, but I think my first breathwork session that I did was probably about 2 years ago. And I remember like laying on my floor and just like bawling. And I was like, what the F is happening in my body? Like, why am I tingling in all these places? I'm like, what is going on here? But it was one of the most transformative releases, and I had no judgment around it. I think that was the first time that I literally let myself, maybe not the first time, but one of the most profound times that I really just let myself cry without judgment. I don't know what is happening right now in my body, but the facilitator was just like, this is normal. Like, you are safe in this. Like, it's okay. And so I had to like, okay, she's telling me I'm safe, but I'm like, ugh, like my body is trembling and I'm like, I don't know what's happening, but it really was. And then I was like, holy crap, I feel like I just ran a marathon. And all I did was like breathe and cry for like 20 minutes. And it was just, and so I went through, that was one of my like days where I was doing breath work like every single night for a while because it felt so good. And then I was like, okay, my body needs a little bit of a break. So now it's a little bit more of a as needed thing, but it was really good to kind of dive in and get some of those really stuck feelings just to come up and out in different capacities. So, and I like that there's so many different types, like the ones that are a lot more, you know, deep and cathartic, and then the ones that, you know, are more energizing or calming or so. I mean, I love that it can be versatile for whatever it is that you need. Same with different meditations. You know, there's inner child meditations, or there's, you know, meet your future self meditation, or there's, you know, so I love the tools that can be adapted to each individual's needs.
Yes. No, I do too. And I love how you mentioned you were doing it for a while there and then you noticed you needed a little bit of a break. You know, I think that kind of ties back into everything like you were mentioning. You know, it's just like the seasons and the stages of our lives, you know, like there was a period where you really needed it for whatever it was you might have been going through. And then there was a period where you didn't need it as consistently.
It's just one of the tools in my toolbox that it's like, oh, I feel like I could really use some breath work. And then it's like, usually if I feel like I have like lodged emotions and I'm like, I can't cry and I need to cry, I have a couple of breathwork videos that kind of get me every single time. I'm like, okay, if I need to cry, I go to this one. If I need to relax, I go to this one. So I kind of have my go-tos, but I kind of do it more of a, you know, as needed. It's almost like a maintenance thing rather than, if you think about like, you know, you go hard and fast with the treatment, and then you have like maintenance level stuff that you do to keep your body healthy. So it's I kind of liken it to that. You know, you kind of go hard and fast when you need to, and then you kind of taper out, and then maybe insert a new tool. Like maybe now, oh, okay, now I'm going to do, I don't know, something else. It's like, what's the flavor of the day? So it's kind of, and then part of that though, tuning in and asking your body, what is it that I need? So it's learning the language of your body and learning how to read your cues and how to read what you need, and then actually giving yourself what you need. It's like not letting your adolescent mind override and say like, okay, but no, I have to do this in order to belong, or I have to do this in order to be seen in a certain way. It's tapping into that adult and saying like, no, this is what I really need. all the facets of the adult chair is that presence, steady, calm, peaceful. And you can also be in your adult chair and be angry because you're tapping into the emotion of the inner child, but you're angry from a different energy. You're angry from more of an assertive energy than an aggressive energy. So there's a little bit of a nuance there, but I think it's all about presence and being grounded in the truth of who you are.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me. This was awesome.
Yeah.
Have you
It's great chatting.
have you heard of a man named Jay Shetty?
Yes.
So he's got a podcast called On Purpose, and he ends his podcast with 2 segments, and I've incorporated those into mine.
Okay.
The first one is the many sides to us. There's 5 questions, and they need to be answered in 1 word each.
Okay.
What is 1 word someone who was meeting you for the first time would use to describe you?
I would say engaging, maybe personable.
What is 1 word someone who knows you extremely well would use to describe you as?
First word that came to me is probably self-critical. That's how they would describe me. They know that I am more self-critical of myself than I probably need to be. But if they were describing me as like how they experience me, say genuine and authentic.
What is 1 word you'd use to describe yourself?
Authentic.
5. What is 1 word that if someone didn't like you or agree with your mindset would use to describe you as?
Oh. If someone who didn't like my mindset, that's a tough one. Somebody who didn't like my mindset would choose to describe me as grounded, maybe. Because I think sometimes my mindset is a little bit more in like the woo-woo space and kind of more free-spirited. So maybe someone who didn't agree with me might call me ungrounded.
What is 1 word you're embodying right now?
Well, my word for 2024 is align. So probably alignment. It's probably what I'm trying. That's my goal, I'll say.
Second segment is the final 5, and these can be answered in a sentence.
Thank God.
What is the best advice you've heard or received?
Gotta go with my 100-year-old man, and you do the best you can with what you've got.
Why is that the best?
I think because our best, and it goes along with the 4 agreements. One of the 4 agreements is always do your best. And I think because it kind of keeps us from self-judgment and self-criticism. And I think if we always do our best, even if this is our day to day, then we can go to bed knowing that, again, the fullest expression of yourself. Like, are you living your best? And are you doing your best? And I think that there's something to be said about striving. And it's not a perfectionism thing, but it's about striving to live your best life, whatever that looks like, the most whole version of you. And so I think doing the best you can with what you've got is, just kind of a way to have compassion for ourselves and meet ourselves where we are in each present moment and then work with what we have.
What is the worst advice you've heard or received?
The worst advice, I think I hate to say it's a societal mindset, but about achievement. And I'm so guilty of falling into the productivity and grinding culture of work. Like everything has to be hard and you have to be, pushing all the time. I think the worst advice is to not let yourself rest. And maybe that's just where I am now because I have a hard time letting myself rest and slowing down. And so I think that's a piece of advice that I'm trying to flip, is seeing rest as, and I hate to say seeing rest as productive, but also, finding the balance of, life is so multifaceted and there's so many parts to it. So I think that rest is lazy, maybe, would probably be some of the worst. And it's not advice, but like one of the worst statements that I think a lot of times we live by, which doesn't actually work for us in the long run.
What is something that you used to value that you no longer value?
Just something I used to value and no longer value. I think it's having a lot of friends versus the deep friends. It's like I used to see like, oh, if my social calendar is filled, then I'm good. Or if I'm, seen in a certain way by other people, then I'm good. But it's like, to me, it's more about quality over quantity.
That makes sense. If you could describe what you would want your legacy to be, what would you want it to say?
That I loved well. And not just loved, the close people in my life, but just spread love everywhere. Like that I was a compassionate, kind, like somebody that people could depend on to be the truest version of myself all the time. Like I don't want to be one of those people that you have to guess. I just want to be my truest self. And so I think that in my legacy, I would want people to remember that I was always genuine and always true and always loving.
If you could create one law in the world that everyone had to follow, what would it be?
One law. No judgment. Don't judge people for things that you have no idea what they're going through. And it kind of goes back to like the personas that we put on, the masks that we wear. And I think we're so quick to judge, and all that does is breed like division, and that raises like that negative vibration of, separation, and that we all just want love and we all just want to belong. And I think that if I could enact a law that's like just inclusion, that was the first word that came to me. I don't know. It's just like, I don't know, my heart breaks for people that don't feel safe to be who they are. And so I think that we're all just doing the best we can with what we've got. And I think that inclusion and love, and I don't know, I always say that my religion is love and my top commandment is don't be an asshole. It's like, just be nice, be kind. So I would say that the law is you were not allowed to judge things or judge, period.
Yeah. I love that. No, I completely agree. My Mimi used to always say, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Just shut up. It as basic as you don't have to say it to the person.
I often say, is it helpful or hurtful? So I don't want to like negate all judgments, because if I got like nasty food in the fridge, I'm going to judge that as nasty, because if I eat it, I'm going to get sick. So that's a helpful judgment, but if it's a hurtful judgment, it doesn't serve anybody to just be spewing negative crap into the world, So it's like, be kind.
It's so true. Thank you so much for speaking with me. I love this. This was awesome. Now, I'm curious. This is not a Jay Shetty question, just a personal question. But do you have any resources you'd recommend for people that help you live your best life?
Resources. Well, obviously the adult chair is the coaching certification that I have. She has a podcast herself and some meditations, resources, and things like that are really great. I listen to podcasts. I journal all the time. I feel like I'm always learning, but I think just anything that helps you to be the fullest expression of yourself. I think that everyone's journey is different. The things that have helped me the most might not help the next person. One thing I love about the adult chair is that it can be fit into so many different areas of life, no matter what stage you're in or what your struggle, whether you have addiction or codependency or inner trauma. It's such a versatile model that I feel very honored and very privileged to have, studied and be a master coach in. I call it the secret sauce. I went through grad school. I was a therapist and this to me just ties everything together very, and it's easy and digestible. And so I would say that probably is my top external resource that I recommend to people.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, and where can listeners connect with you? I know you've got a website, and I will link that in the show notes, but where can they connect with you and get in touch?
Yeah, I'd love that. So my website is trueconsciousliving.com, and I am at True Conscious Living both on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. About once or twice a week, I'll post a talking reel where I'll talk about different topics that either come up in sessions or things that I'm learning about, just to kind of share some of the things that are meaningful to me and meaningful to my clients to see if it resonates and kind of helps other people, live in the best version of themselves.
Awesome. And I will link all of that in the show notes. Is there any final words of wisdom, anything else you want to share with listeners before we close out?
Thank you for that. I think that just to sum it up in everything that we said, life's hard. And so I want to validate that even the coaching and therapy work, I hate to say it's work necessarily, but I think life is work. And so I think it's about what you make it. You're worth the work. I think that's what I would leave people with. If you're struggling or you're having a hard time with anything in life, there's nothing. I haven't found a lot of things that are, I don't want to say unfixable because I don't like that word, but that I can't navigate, or at least minimize the intensity of how you're experiencing them, or at least to have a compassionate ear. Like there's always help available. There's always resources available. And so you don't have to suffer in silence. And there's going to be somebody out there to help, whether it's, me or whether it's somebody else. Like just to not give up on yourself and to be the best adult that you can be. Because life is work. But, to quote my favorite Glennon Doyle, we can do hard things. She's another resource that I love is her podcast. So
thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of Mando's Mindset. In case no one told you today, I'm proud of you. I'm rooting for you. And you got this. As always, if you enjoyed the show, I would really appreciate it if you would leave me a 5-star rating, leave a review, and share it with anyone you think would benefit from this. And don't forget, you are only one mindset shift away from shifting your life. Thanks, guys. Until next time.